This is a Sony Vaio laptop, can you tell? Honestly, this has to be one of the weirdest laptop designs I've seen in a long time. This is the QR1, released back in the year 2000. 25 years later, does this Windows ME powered laptop still work? And is it a notable point in Sony's history? Well, let's take a look.
There isn't that much information out there about this rare Sony laptop, which is surprising to me given its, how do you put it, unique design. Could it be any more early 2000s? In a good way, of course. A webpage still exists documenting the QR1's unveiling at a Sony Vaio Expo held in September of 2000. The reporter mentions that the carry handle and bezel are supposed to resemble a pipe chair, and let's just say there were many other wacky designs on display at that event. It originally came with the short-lived Windows Me and something called a port pet. We'll have to see what that is later in the video. And time has not been kind to the keyboard whatsoever. While the screen hinge is fine, there are some other cosmetic defects. The plastic bezel is missing a good chunk, likely due to a drop.
Some of you may think that the QR1 looks a lot like Apple's iBook G3 clamshell, and you'd be right, but the QR1's handle actually has another notable feature.
They're both chunky and stand out compared to other laptops of the time, but the QR1's handle doubles as a keyboard riser, which is pretty neat. Okay, it's time to see if this laptop still works. This unit was kindly given to me by Douglas here in Adelaide. He had mentioned a few issues that this laptop has, like a stuck key, and that the trackpad left and right buttons no longer function. But it does fire up into Windows ME eventually. It's got an Intel Celeron and 512 megabytes of RAM, pretty decent for the year 2000. And given that this is a thick device, it has a decent selection of ports. We really used to be spoiled with a diverse range of connectivity, hey? And we'll take a closer look to see if there are any other quirky features on this Vaio later in the video.
If you were in the market for a laptop back in late 2000, there were definitely a lot of options, most of which came with an Intel Celeron, just like this Toshiba satellite I have here that I actually covered in a video many years ago.
While it's definitely more of a boring looking laptop, it is super solid and feature rich, and it even came with a floppy drive. Douglas did mention that the battery had apparently leaked, which caused the trackpad buttons to fail, which is why it's no longer in here, I'm guessing. I think that's a good enough reason to open it up and see what it's like internally. I can't find any disassembly guides online, so we're going in blind, but it does appear pretty obvious as to how it comes apart. It appears as if there's a little panel that comes off the rear. Below is another panel held in place by some more Phillips head screws. I'd highly recommend keeping track of where exactly the screws came from, so the reassembly will be easier. And now we get our first look at the internals of the QR1. No signs of battery corrosion damage so far, and thankfully it looks as if it's super easy to get to the CPU and fan assembly. And given that the hard disk in here is 10 gigabytes, I believe it is the original one. And thankfully it is still running almost 25 years later, although a little bit slow now.
So it seems the hard disk in this laptop is on the way out, and honestly it really sucks accidentally deleting or losing files and footage. But if you accidentally delete your files or footage, it's not the end of the world and you can get them back thanks to Wondershare Recoverit.
Has this ever happened to you? Wiping footage you haven't yet imported or backed up is a mistake we've all made at some point. Thankfully, the solution is pretty simple. Grab your nearest computer running Windows or Mac OS, plug in your drive that you want to recover files from, and as you can see, the SD card doesn't have any files on it, and using the link below, go and download Recoverit. It's super quick and easy to install. Select the drive you want scanned, then Recoverit will get to work. Once the scan is complete, you'll have access to all of your previously deleted files. And not only did it recover every video file from the formatted SD card, it also found many clips from months ago after several wipes and filming sessions. It doesn't matter what type of file you're missing, Recoverit can find them all. Also, you never know what files can be hidden and deleted on memory cards you've got lying around. I even managed to find this footage my younger brother filmed almost 15 years ago.
Don't let lost files stress you out. Wondershare Recoverit is trusted by over 100 million users worldwide.
For secure, reliable, and powerful data recovery, click the link below to find out more and try it out. And there's also a date actually written on the motherboard, the 5th of July 2000. And getting to the CPU is fairly easy, with only 3 screws holding the heatsink in position. With a little bit of wiggling, it comes off. It uses a thermal pad instead of thermal paste. You don't often see socketed laptop CPUs anymore, that's for sure. With a flathead bit, I was able to turn the mechanism, releasing the 500 MHz Celeron. I'm not aware of any possible upgrades, but I'd also imagine any compatible processors would be very hard to come by now. And while we've got this thing open, I thought I would dig a little bit deeper to see why the trackpad buttons don't work. And after removing any remaining Phillips head screws, the whole back panel comes right off. Well, here's some corrosion and part of the connector to the missing CMOS battery that had leaked. Thankfully, it appears as the damage is isolated to this board and hasn't spread further. Most of the damage is to the wiring that runs to the trackpad buttons and likely also affects whatever this little tube does. Maybe that's some kind of light sensor. And with any luck, cleaning the surface off and removing as much of the corrosion will get it working again. I'll also remove the detached connector from the old CMOS battery, as there's no point leaving it in. I'm using isopropyl alcohol, but I've heard vinegar is also an effective corrosion removal substance. The surface underneath doesn't look too bad. It hasn't eaten away too much of the circuitry. I definitely don't have the skills to rebuild this, and sourcing a replacement part would be almost impossible. That's one of the downsides to owning and cleaning up rare old laptops. Unless you've got a donor machine, you're essentially left to improvise. And please let me know if you've got another one of these laptops lying around. I may consider buying it. Thankfully, the bottom panel wasn't affected by the leaking battery. If this had an aluminium or aluminum enclosure, as Americans would say, it would have been much worse. And to get the rest of the battery residue off, I used some eucalyptus oil, which worked very well. Oh, and I only just realized that the casing is somewhat transparent, which would make for a cool lighting mod. The thermal pad used on the CPU was still soft and in good condition, so I thought I would simply use it again. If only some of Sony's other Vaio laptops were this easy to open. Now, does it still work? Thankfully, it still turns on, but the trackpad buttons still don't function sadly. But you can still double tap the trackpad itself or use an external mouse if you wanted to click things on screen.
While this device seems pretty durable and the handle is pretty strong, it looks as if it may have taken a fall at some point, so let's try and fix it.
I'd heard of a product called Need It, so I went to my local Bunnings and bought a tube. I plan on using a chunk to fill in the missing piece, being sure to clean and prepare the area as instructed. One of the main warnings on the packaging mentioned not getting this on your hands or skin. I didn't have any latex gloves, so hopefully this thicker pair of gloves gives me enough dexterity. Immediately I realized these gloves may not have been ideal, but I had to wear something and I was too excited to wait until the next day to get some latex ones. Next, I got a chunk out of the tube and kneaded it with my hands until it was a uniform color. I then tried to get it into the correct shape as quickly as I could. This stuff gets hard within a few short minutes, but after a few hours you can sand it off and file it down. I'll do the sanding and shaping outside to avoid a buildup of harmful dust in my filming room. This stuff really does become hard as rock like the packaging says, but I was able to grind it down. I found getting the curve quite challenging, and it probably still didn't help that I was using a less than ideal tool. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure this was more so designed for buffing rather than sanding, but after some time and effort it was looking a little bit better. It still needs some silver paint and a tidy up, but this is starting to improve. I had some chrome spray paint lying around and figured it would look similar to the rest of the bezel. I didn't exactly do the neatest job, but I can always sand it back further and touch it up at a later time. At least it isn't missing a large chunk anymore, so I think it's time to see exactly what's on here. And yeah, that paint doesn't come off your hands easily, it seems. Navigating Windows is slightly more challenging since I can't read Japanese, and after stumbling through some menus I found Picture Toy. This allows you to make your desktop look a whole lot better. The next quirky bit of software is called Navin U. An optional GPS attachment seems to have been an option at some point. Some map data for the Japanese region appears to be installed, and you can zoom in pretty far to see the Japanese symbol for good luck and prosperity. The next program is pretty odd as well. You can interact with this pink bear. It looks like you're actually hitting it though. Oh, and you can send emails or something. Eventually, I found the included games, and of course we had to test Space Cadet Pinball. I remember when heaps of my classmates would compete for the highest score, and this was 20 years ago, so I'm really feeling old right now. This is, I'm gonna say it's pronounced Sipari. As far as I know, this was an online virtual chat room, and it blows my mind that something like this existed 25 years ago. And I've got a feeling if you hook this up to the internet, there wouldn't be anyone else playing. Although surprisingly, it can run Lego Island 2 at 1024 by 768 reasonably well. For some reason, trying to play at lower resolutions doesn't fill the entire screen. Motocross Madness 2 also runs pretty well at 640 by 480, the highest resolution, so it sadly doesn't fill the whole screen. And once again, this is pretty playable. Oh, what's the dolphin doing? Yes, one of the many Microsoft Office digital assistants, but I wouldn't recommend using this laptop for any sort of typing though. It's a truly horrible experience.
So why was the QR1 so chunky? At the time, it probably wasn't cheap given that it was a Sony Vaio device, and Sony was selling Vaios as thin as this PCG 505 at the time.
It's literally half the thickness while still packing a lot of ports and features. That's still pretty impressive compared to modern laptops, honestly. But the QR1 does have one of these spinny boys built right in. There were external options for the Vaio 505 though. This really is one of the sacrifices you had to make for a thin laptop around 25 years ago. And once again, a big thank you to Douglas for giving me this weird piece of laptop history. It truly is the perfect weird device for when you're on the go.
Thank you very much for watching. The early 2000s really were a unique time for laptop designs, and I think it's fair to say that the design of the QR1 didn't exactly catch on. And I don't think there were many other laptops released with handles after this. Thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.